Hello, my name is BJ Paris. Welcome to Tapping Into His Treasures. It's Memorial Day. We're up here in Maine and the sun is just peeking through. Chances of rain, and we hope it doesn't rain on the parade. My little great-grandkids are going to be marching as Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So, remembering all of our military heroes and their families today. Our theme today is the power of God. God made all things that exist in 6 days, and He spoke them into existence with His words. Totally God's power. Miracle. He made the waters, and this is my favorite part. When He made the oceans, He placed the sand as a boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier. Stop and visualize that. The waters can't go any farther than that perpetual barrier. That's also found in the book of Jeremiah 5:22, if you'd like to look that up. Let there be light, He said, and there was light. Then He made the sky, and He made the earth, which put forth vegetation. And this is another one of my favorite parts. He suspended the earth in the atmosphere with nothing holding it up. He designed it to rotate. Just imagine if the sun or the moon didn't rise one day or night. What would it be like? Yet God is faithful to let it happen every single day, year after year, century after century. God made the lights in the universe. The moon, the sun, and the stars. All the galaxies. And then God created living creatures, from great monsters to little birds. This is your God. Your God who's with you every day and who loves you, who did all these majestic things. And then God made man after His image. And then woman. You remember the story, how He had Adam go into his sleep and He took one of his ribs and He made woman? God did all that. In Genesis 5:21-24, Enoch was translated into heaven without experiencing death. He was a man who walked with God. How could that have happened? A man just translating into heaven without dying. It was because of the power of God. And then later in Genesis, God instructed Noah to build an ark. Oh, we all laugh about the story, the modern day version of Noah's Ark. But there was a really serious story behind that. And God brought a great flood upon the earth. It lasted a long time. Who else could have brought a flood like that? I mean, yes, we have storms and floods that last a day or two or three, but not all that time. And even more wonderful than all that is He saved Noah and his family. They could have been drowned along with everybody else, but he was a good and upright man, so God saved Noah and his family and 2 of every type of animal and creature. Wow, an amazing display of God's power and His love. And then a little further on, Lot's wife turned to a pillar of salt. How would that have happened? Who could cause that to happen? You remember the story when Sodom and Gomorrah was burned and destroyed because of the sexual sins going on in the city? And the angels came to tell Lot to take his family and to leave town the night before and bid them not to look back. And his wife looked back and turned as hard as salt, and they had to go on without her. And I think I mentioned a couple of years ago that they even found remnants of that pillar of salt. Scientists from the United States found remnants from that pillar of salt back in, I think, around 1948 or something. So it was true. No one ever doubted it was true. And going a little farther in Genesis. By the way, these are not all the miracles of God and Jesus. I just picked out a big percentage of them. So if I missed any, it's because I couldn't squeeze them all into one show. So a little farther into Genesis, Sarah, Abraham's wife, who could not conceive all her life, conceived at the age of 87. Well, what do you say to that? That goes beyond the Guinness Book of World Records, right? Her childbearing days were over. She ceased to have her monthlies. Her conception was a miracle, because God wasn't ready to let her conceive. And the child that she conceived was the promised seed of Abraham. So it had to be according to God's perfect timing. And then the story of Joseph in Genesis. Remember, Joseph was thrown into a well by his brothers because they were jealous of him. Now this Joseph was a descendant of Isaac, who Sarah conceived and bore. So they threw him into a well, and I would think that anybody thrown into a well would just lay there and die. But what happened? He became the governor of Egypt. Some merchants were traveling. The brothers ended up taking him out of the well and selling him to the merchants. And they took him on to Egypt. And yes, he was in jail for 13 years or so. But eventually he became the governor of Egypt. And there was a reason behind that. Because God orchestrated this whole thing by his power, because he knew there would be a famine in the land. And he raised up Joseph to become a leader in order to save all the people. And Joseph was a type of Christ. And just as Jesus came to save everybody who would believe him for it, Joseph was chosen to save people by orchestrating a plan to save food and have it last for 7 years. Now a little farther, in Exodus, the next book, God appeared to Moses as a fire in a burning bush. That had to be extraordinary. Oh, how we would love to have seen that. And then all the trips back and forth to Egypt and to Pharaoh with Moses and his brother Aaron. And one supernatural happening was that when he had the stick in his hand, God told him to throw the stick on the floor, and it became a serpent. Well, that was by the power of God. It just didn't happen. Things like that just don't happen. And then after, when he reached out for the serpent, it became a stick again. The power of God. And then the 10 plagues of Egypt. I don't have them all written down, but a few of them from memory. The infestation of frogs. Can you imagine what it would be like? It would be like me sitting here, and there would be thousands of frogs all jumping all over me, jumping over the couch, jumping over the coffee table, jumping on the furniture, just all over the place. I would look out the window, and there would be frogs jumping up at the lamppost, all over the cars parked out there. Frogs everywhere. And what else? All the water turning to blood. Imagine going to fill your coffee pot in the morning and turning on your faucet, and all blood came out. And if you went down to the stream or down to the river, it was all red from blood. God was showing his power. The infestation of stinging bugs. They could have been locusts, I can't remember. Probably locusts. And can you imagine? You know how the mayflies are. You have to keep doing this and this and this because they're bothersome. Well, those bugs were more than bothersome. They were stinging. So, I mean, it was like taking your life in your hands just to go outside. Wow. And then, of course, the worst of the worst was the death of the firstborn. Terrible. All the screaming moms and dads. God wrote the 10 Commandments on a slab of stone with his finger. Wow. Beautiful miracle. And then a little later on, the parting of the Red Sea. How many times we've seen Charlton Heston and other actors portray Moses and Pharaoh and all the chariots and his armies were chasing the Israelites across the Red Sea, and God waited for them, the Israelites, to get up on land, and then brought the waters over all the enemy armies. Wow. And then next over in Numbers 22:8, Balaam's donkey spoke. Have you ever heard an animal speak? I mean, other than parrots, little pets. God wanted to talk to Balaam and to tell him something, but he was pretty ignorant and he wasn't hearing God. So God devised this plan. And he had the donkey speak just to get Balaam's attention. So more power of God. And on a little farther, Samson, he was blessed with supernatural strength from God from before he was born. And with that strength, he performed many mighty acts. And then his enemies put out his eyes. They were very jealous of him. And it wasn't fun for him at all. And then they used him for sport at the celebration they were having with a lot of people. And he prayed for God to give him strength one last time, which God did. And Samson did something that it would probably take 2 bulldozers to do. He did it all by himself with his arms, with his bare hands. He knocked down the pillars which held up the building where 3,000 guests were attending the event. They were all killed, including Samson, by the power of God. And that's found in Judges 16:30. And on a little farther, in the books of Kings and Chronicles, it tells of the divine discipline that God inflicted upon David because of his actions. God did some things that David did not like, the killing of Uriah and other things, taking the census, because he wasn't supposed to do things like that, especially as a king representing God. So God released his power and caused thousands and thousands of David's men to be killed in battle. Plus 2 of his own sons, whom he loved dearly, were killed. The power of God. And then in 1 Kings, the Lord appeared to King Solomon by his supernatural power. Wow. Wow. Through that same power, Isaiah prophesied about the virgin birth of Christ and of his sufferings. That was all the power of God. It wasn't a mighty display like killing thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands, in David's army, but nevertheless, it's the same power. He spoke to Isaiah quietly through the Spirit of God. It's all God's power. In the book of Ezekiel, there's several miracles listed. I just have one written down. It's in Ezekiel 37. When God translated Ezekiel into a valley of dry bones in order to teach him a lesson that he wanted to pass on to all of us even today. And then Elijah was allowed to ride a chariot straight into heaven. How do you like that? God's power. And then from Elijah, we go to Elisha, whose bones, after he died, his bones caused a dead man to be raised from the dead. Remember the story? They threw the dead body into the grave, and just because they touched Elijah's bones, the dead man became alive. Wow. And then going on to Daniel. Remember the story of the 4th man in the furnace? With Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They went into the furnace because they wouldn't abide by the king's decree. And when the king's men looked inside, they saw 4 men. And that 4th man was the angel of the Lord. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, never were harmed. They were never burned. They were totally whole when they came out of that furnace. Wow. And then Daniel was in a lion's den. And he was totally unharmed. The lions weren't hungry that night. Why? Because it's the power of God. In a thread throughout the books of the Old Testament, God preserved his men and his armies. That was a miracle. Jonah and the whale. We do remember that story, don't we? Jonah didn't want to follow God, and he jumped on that ship, and there was a big storm, and they were losing their cargo and everything, and they said, somebody on this ship is a problem. Which one is it? And Jonah confessed. I can't think of the phrase I want to use. He owned up to it, and so he had them throw him overboard so that the strong seas would cease. And the whale swallowed Jonah, and he was there for 3 days, just the way Jesus was in the underworld for 3 days after his death. And God really got hold of Jonah. And that was a miracle that he lived through that, and the whale actually spit him out close to the shore or on shore. And then we're over into the New Testament, and the biggest miracle of all history. Mary, a young girl, conceived Jesus by the Holy Spirit after the angel Gabriel appeared to her and announced that it would happen. And it's found in Matthew 1:18-25, and in Luke 1:26-38. All by the power of God. And then, by Jewish tradition, she should have been stoned to death because they thought she was conceived outside of wedlock by some man. And Joseph was even hesitant about marrying her fiancé. But another power of God demonstrated was that Joseph married Mary because God told him to in a dream. That was a supernatural event. Wow, God, so powerful. And then, of course, the miracles of Jesus. He changed water into wine at a wedding at Cana in John 2:1-11. Remember the story? They ran out of wine. And his mom came to him, Mary, and he had the servants fill up, whatever you call those, with water, and he just changed them miraculously into wine. And it was better than the wine that the groom's father had supplied. Jesus healed a royal official's son. Remember that story in John 4, from verses 46-54? Beautiful story. He healed a possessed man in Mark 1, verses 21-28. Can you imagine having all those demons living inside of you and running around naked and like a crazy person, and have Jesus tell them legions to get out and they were gone? Well, and peace overcame that crazy man. Beautiful healing by Jesus, by his power. Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law in Matthew 8, verses 14-15. Remember, she was so sick, almost dying in the bed, and he healed her. And then she got out of the bed and got up and began to serve Jesus and the disciples. Wow. Listen to this. He healed many people at sunset. It's right in the Bible. Sunset. That seems to me that there must be some spiritual significance in that, because he healed more at sunset than any other time. I have to probe more into that. I'm very interested in finding out what could be behind that. And remember the fish? He had the disciples catch a very large number of fish in Luke 5, verses 3-10. And remember the other fish? He took the little boy's fish and the bread and he multiplied it to feed 5,000. Men, not counting women and children. Power of God. He calmed a storm. Remember him calming the storm? He supposedly was asleep on the boat when the storm came up. Well, we know better than that, don't we? He made them think he was sleeping, the disciples. And he just calmed the storm, and then what happened? He walked on the water. Well, human beings don't walk on water because of gravity. They fall right down. And then he had Peter walk on the water for that short time before he looked down. Power of God. He healed a leper in Matthew 8, verses 1 to 3. It had to be terrible to be a leper. All that, those sores breaking out on your face, the people's faces and arms and legs, all of the skin. It had to be awful. And not only that, lepers were scorned. And he healed a leper, probably more than one. He healed a blind man. Oh, can you imagine not seeing all of your life from being born blind and all of a sudden Jesus coming along and touching your eyes and you could see? What a beautiful miracle. And of course, even more wonderful than all of those, when Jesus rose from the dead, the devil couldn't keep him in the grave. He rose from the dead. And then after he rose, more power displayed. He appeared to the disciples and others many times, to the women and to the two men walking along the road. Wow. And then another miracle. He ascended into heaven. And then going on to the Acts of the Apostles, more power displayed. The vision of the tongues of fire, and everyone began speaking in other languages in chapter 2 of Acts. Wow. And God poured out his Spirit on all mankind. So all have his Spirit living within us. And as the assistant pastor preached at church yesterday, that Jesus inside of us is praying all the time. Even when we're not praying, Jesus is praying for us and in us. And going a little farther, when Peter was jailed, just as Paul was many times, an angel got Peter out of jail. An angel actually undid his chains and they walked through the jail walls together. Supernatural. Peter and Paul both healed many people in the New Testament. In Acts and in the New Testament, by the power of God, they heal many people. In the book of Revelations, John had a vision of 7 lampstands and of the angel of the Lord, and more visions besides, including a vision of a new heaven and a new earth. Beautiful power of God demonstrated. Yes, God showed him these things for him to pass in his writings about them on to everybody back then and to us in the future. And just throw this in, what were the chances of John getting all those writings out to the church? There were so many guards, and they probably strip searched as many people as they found that came in and out of Patmos. So somehow, by the power of God, they were hidden so well that they were never discovered. And because of that, they were passed on from generation to generation. Thank God. And in our day today, in our day and age, many have had glimpses. Many have had glimpses of heaven and hell. These stories are on TV, on YouTube, and on the net. I have experienced some of these personally, so there's no doubt in my mind about these supernatural events happening by the power of God today. Remember that plane that landed on the Hudson River and nobody lost their lives? Remember, you could see the plane and all the passengers were standing on both wings? That's a picture that will live on in our minds forever. And yes, the pilot was amazing, but God was behind that. God was certainly in that, for sure. God's power. Today, prayers are answered in minutes because we have a direct phone line, you might as well say, to God through prayer and through Christ. When we are weighed down with oppression, strongholds, and emotional baggage, and we go to God and ask Him to cover us with Jesus' blood, all the oppression is gone within minutes, and we are as good as new. On TV the other night, a man was stabbed in his head. Somebody tried to stab him in the brain. The knife missed 4 vital parts of his brain by a fraction of a centimeter, or whatever you call them. Fraction. The doctor said that it would have been a miracle to miss just 1 of those vital parts, let alone 4. So that was like a quadruple miracle. Now, if God could do all of these amazing things and trillions of other things besides, He can certainly perform impossible things in your life. Don't be afraid to ask Him for a miracle. I hope some of these things encourage you to think about all the things that God has done for our predecessors and for you in your lives. And I hope that you will take the time to ponder on these things and to praise and thank Him afresh for everything that He's done and for everything that He is going to continue to do. Thanks for watching. God bless you and God bless yours. God keep you and God keep yours. Till next time, bye for now.